Well, good afternoon and good morning, Alani. And thank you, everybody, so far for joining from various parts of the world. It is 12:30, so I figured we might as well get started. And yeah, I would love to start just with some introductions. So my name is Jessie Call. I'm a student at Stanford University, and I'm really thrilled to be moderating this panel on behalf of ASU's Julian Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. And most importantly, I'm excited to share this time here to discuss the importance of marine protected areas and to hear from some incredible leaders in the space of marine conservation and corporate sustainability about the ways in which businesses can champion the sustainable development goals through mission-driven work. And to our audience, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat box, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to do some audience Q&A. So let's get started. I'd love to introduce the panel. Joining us today, we have Dr. Sylvia Earle, who is the president and chairman of Mission Blue, where she's working to establish a worldwide network of marine protected areas called Hope Spots. And in addition to serving as a National Geographic Society Explorer in Residence, Sylvia is an accomplished oceanographer, explorer, author, lecturer, with a lifetime of experience as a field research scientist, government official, and director for corporate and nonprofit organizations. With such a distinguished career, it's no surprise, really, that she's been called her deepness by The New Yorker and The New York Times, a living legend by the Library of Congress, and first hero for the planet by Time magazine. Sylvia, you've dedicated your life to advocating for the ocean and have inspired so many people around the world, including myself, to really take action in protecting the ocean. So I'm honored to have this time and opportunity to talk with you. Also joining us today, we have Alani, who is the Senior Vice President for Oceans at Conservation International, and as well as the founder of Big Ocean, which is a network of the world's largest marine managed areas. She's played a pivotal role in shaping the emerging field of large-scale ocean conservation and has led the design and establishment of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and World Heritage Site in Hawaii, which is the largest contiguous, fully protected area in the U.S. and the largest marine conservation area in the world. So just incredible. I remember I was in Hawaii during the IUCN World Conservation Congress in 2016 when Obama made this designation, and it was truly just incredible to be there for that. So thank you. And prior to joining Conservation International, Alani was the director of ocean initiatives for NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries and was a social innovation fellow at Stanford University. And it's wonderful to be joined by a fellow Stanford Cardinal. And
Nerd Nation.
Nerd Nation, exactly. I'm sure we have some other Cardinals watching today. And finally, our third panelist, Lance Morgan. Thank you for joining us. Lance is currently the president of the Marine Conservation Institute, and he has extensive research experience ranging from zoology to conservation science and is well respected in the ocean conservation community. He's chairman of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, a steering committee member of the High Seas Alliance, and a community group member for the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. He's worked closely with Mission Blue, as well as Conservation International, and is a member of the Hope Spots Council and champion of its California Seamounts Hope Spot. So welcome to all the panelists. We're so excited to share this time of conversation with you. So figured we might as well dive in. Sylvia, I would love to start with a question to you. And kind of rewind a bit to 2009, when you won the TED Prize. Your wish was to create a campaign that ignites public support for a global network of marine protected areas called Hope Spots that would be large enough to save and restore the blue heart of the planet. Now, you said this at a time when less than 1% of the world's oceans were protected. And here we are over a decade later, and I would love for you to share what progress has been made in this time and how the Sustainable Development Goals played a role in this progress.
Well, we've come a long way in 10 years. We haven't come far enough. There was a goal by 2020 to have 10%. And, it depends on how you count. But if you count fully protected areas, we're under 3%. I mean, really protected, where even the fish are safe. 2030, we have a goal of 30%. It is achievable, especially if we get serious about the high seas. If we just took that bold step and said, let's just have no industrial fishing in the high seas in a stroke, the biggest problem that faces half the world would be under control, because it's that large-scale industrial fishing, whether it's in the high seas or even in the exclusive economic zones of various countries, that really looms large as high on the list of the biggest problems, what we're taking out of the ocean. So I'm optimistic, have to be, because we've come a long way in 10 years, but as I say, not far enough. But what's exciting and what's encouraging is what we now know, not just in the last 10 years, but in the last 50 years. 50 years ago, I suppose you could say, essentially none of the ocean was really safeguarded at the level that we know is necessary. And here we are at a time when the problems that face the world are so obvious, and we still have this reluctance to face up to the reality and take the action that we know we have to do. We know what to do. We just have to get out there and do it. Again, the encouraging thing is I'm with a panel of people who are doing it, and we're not alone. As people get to know and understand the connection between what's happening to the ocean, their health, the health of the planet, the future that is right here in front of us, the next 10 years are likely to be the most important, literally, in the next 10,000 years. We know what to do. We just have to do it.
Of course, I think that's both encouraging and, it's also important to keep in mind that we really do need to keep the pressure on. And I'm curious as well, are you able to speak at all to, the role that the Sustainable Development Goals have played in kind of shaping global action in regards to ocean conservation and ocean conservation efforts?
It's critical that we think globally. It's important that we act in the sphere over which we have some direct influence, whether it's in our home, in our community, in our state, in our countries, individual countries. But the UN Sustainable Development Goals have brought us together to say we're all in this with one planet, and what anybody does affects everybody everywhere, and also what we don't do affects everybody everywhere. It's been slow to really reach that critical level of awareness. And when I think about when the development goals were framed, not just when they were articulated formally, but they've had a long history, and coming to the point where together we say, we've got this one little blue speck in the universe and we've got to take care of it. There's only so much planet to go around. And if we obey the rules, if you will, the laws of nature, that is, there's a chance that we can emerge in the 21st century realizing that we are a part of nature, the highest priority, ahead of all the other goals that we have. We've got to maintain the habitability of the planet. I mean, if the spacecraft is crashing, nothing else you care about. It matters. So all the others are subsets of that number one thing, take care of the planet. And how do you do that when the planet is mostly blue, when most of life on Earth is ocean, when the climate is governed by the ocean, when temperature, when the greatest diversity of life, when most wildlife is out there in the ocean? First, you've got to acknowledge that's the situation that we face. If you don't put that as number one, we can spend a lot of time looking at these other development goals and we'll fail if we don't succeed in taking care of the planet that makes our existence possible.
Of course. Thank you, Sylvia. Alani, I'd love to turn to you now. And I've always been inspired by your ambitious action in protecting the ocean. And I know Conservation International is obviously very committed to protecting the ocean, as well as those who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods. So I would love to hear what your vision is for large-scale MPAs, and I'd love to hear you highlight how this vision aligns with the work of the UN as well.
You're muted.
You may be muted. Can you hear us? No. I heard you a minute ago, though. Maybe try without.
She froze.
Okay, that's no worries. I'm sure she'll be able to log back on. And until then, Lance, maybe we can put it over to you for a moment. So obviously you all are devoted to protecting the ocean. However, as Sylvia mentioned, current efforts to protect marine environments and small-scale fisheries are not yet meeting the urgent need to protect this immense and fragile resource. And I know you've worked closely with Mission Blue to create your MP Atlas database at Marine Conservation Institute. And can you tell us a little bit about this collaboration and you know how you've collaborated with others in the space, and kind of touch upon some of the challenges that you face on a local, regional, and global scale?
Sure. Well, thank you first for the opportunity to be here, and being with Sylvia and Alani, two really strong female marine conservation leaders, is a real privilege for me. They're both heroes of mine, and I really respect them a great deal. We at Marine Conservation Institute are dedicated to ensuring the same global network of marine protected areas. A few years ago, we began collaborating with both of the groups here and many others. We started a somewhat of a disruptive technology in the Marine Protection Atlas, and that was to really take a look at how effective MPAs were, where they were, and challenge the status quo just a little bit from the standpoint of people may have heard of paper parks. Sylvia alluded to fully protected areas, but making sure that when governments made these commitments, they were actually following through with effective conservation in these protected areas. And so that has led on to some further initiatives. A current one underway is the MPA guide, which you might want to Google and look at, a kind of a more soup to nuts kind of view of MPAs, not just is it protected from fishing, but is it doing all those steps? And then we in turn have also at Marine Conservation Institute developed this program called Blue Parks, which is somewhat of an eco label. And so it's great to get a hope spot going and get the community engaged. And we really want to see this all develop into really effective areas. So the Marine Protection Atlas now has, again, as a website, mpatlas.org. You can go, you can look at how a country is doing against this SDG goal. 14 for the oceans, 14.5 says 10% by this year. It's a really good target. Sylvia was quite correct that we would love to see that 10% be fully protected. It isn't quite there yet, but a lot of progress has been made. So if you think about a curve of growth, that curve has been steepening along the way. And so we're actually accelerating growth. It still isn't enough. And now we are talking about larger goals, like 30% by 2030. And that curve has to steepen again significantly if we are to get to that point. And this is the point at which, 10% is a nice milestone. It's an important milestone. It's also important that community continues to reflect on the fact that even with these targets, the oceans in general are, we're not status quo, right? If we just stop right now, things won't get better. We have to actively get engaged in restoring our oceans, and that's a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. But we know protected areas work. We know they work really well. If you stop, removing things that kill, removing things that harm marine life, stop killing marine life, then you get these benefits. These benefits are sometimes slow to recover. Most MPAs have maybe a 5 to 10 year window in which they really show the benefits. So there's a short-term cost, and that short-term cost often is the impediment to MPAs. We're not looking at the fact that in 10 years there will be more healthier systems there that are giving all of us these benefits. Carbon storage will increase in these areas if we back off. There'll be a strategy for blue carbon and climate mitigation and these other things. So it's not just this narrow focus on rebuilding fisheries, which is super important and a really critical thing, but it's the whole benefits of the system that come back together.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my next question was going to be very much along those same lines of marine protected area opposition is largely met by, this motivation of near-term and profit-driven practices, or met with doubts of effectiveness of what these MPAs can achieve. So this is a question to both of you. How do you go about, how do you respond to this opposition, and how should we go about incentivizing these more profit-minded actors in taking a longer-term view and to take into account more than just the immediate financial rewards that may be driving their decisions in the short run?
Go, Lance, go. I'll follow up.
Thank you. Well, I alluded to part of the challenge being there's a time lag from allowing these populations to recover and restore. The good news on that side is the ocean doesn't have the same level of habitat degradation and extinctions that have happened on the land. So a lot of the pieces are still there. And so if we can ease off, these pieces will come back. We still have sea otters and kelp forests of, California and the Pacific coast. Even though they're greatly reduced, they're still there, they can recover. The other piece of this is that a cost to one group, like the fishing industry, is not necessarily the same benefit of the MPA to another group that might be interested in climate storage or carbon or wetland restoration. So I think in some regards, we need the governance systems to accurately understand that there might be a cost to limiting fishing over a short period of time in order to restore this bigger picture, which they will be a beneficiary. The other, problem we have is that right now the system is not as productive as it used to be, right? So we're losing money by not restoring these populations. We're losing to climate change by not having wetlands that are functioning well and not having kelp forests that are able to, be productive. The microalgae in the ocean, which are really the source of oxygen. Whale poop is really important to these things. It's estimated that whales, if we would recover whales from something like their current level, which is about 25% of historic, all that whale poop into the sunlit ocean will stimulate plankton growth. This plankton will pull in carbon. You know, these systems, now that we understand them better, will be much more productive. So we have to get this message across. We need good business and economic leaders to recognize why that is beneficial and help us, you know, as conservationists, make this case for arguments. Right now, I saw something recently about doing a blue carbon evaluation and trying to get blue carbon credits for Mpas. Well, that's really good, but it was, I mean, I'm guessing it's a $250,000 process to get accredited if you're a marine protected area for being blue carbon. That's a cost that marine protected areas can't really make. So we need, you know, industry to maybe look at how can we help facilitate that conversation or pay for some of that as part of this and not put the burden on the conservation business to fund that.
Could I jump in?
Yeah.
Dive in.
Dive in, go ahead.
We need to fundamentally look at the value of the ocean with new eyes. Now that we know what we know, blue carbon, now that we can connect the dots, we can see the whales and climate in one breath. We understand that whale poop matters. So does tuna poop. So does copepod, cod, all life. It's the carbon cycle that we should learn when we learn our alphabet, when we learn our numbers. When we're kids, we should understand the cycle of life, about what drives photosynthesis, what generates oxygen, and to realize that the ocean is the principal engine that keeps Earth functioning. We look at fish. We've gotten into the habit of looking at them the way we used to look at birds, the way we used to look at mammals and other creatures on the land as primarily products, as food. The Lewis and Clark expedition, when they made their great westward exploration of North America, they were interested in wildlife for their fur. You know, birds were just something to eat. And we ate a lot of them. Even when my parents were kids, ducks were taken by the truckload commercially out of the sky. We took birds the way we now take fish. We used to look at birds the way we now look at fish. We changed with whales. When I was a kid, whales were pounds of meat, barrels of oil. Today, there's this constituency of those who we reached kind of a critical mass of people who could see whales and other marine mammals with a new perspective, not just a dollar sign on their blubbery hides. Can we ever get to the point where we might look at tuna as carbon-based units, as wildlife? You know, the biggest wildlife trade on the planet is fish and shrimp and squid and krill. Wildlife traded as if that's okay. It is not okay when you look at what's happened to tuna in the Pacific. The latest figures are that the adult population of tunas is like less than 3% of what it was in 1970. We're really good at catching them and selling them, wildlife traded for money, instead of looking at them as carbon-based units, instead of looking at them as part of our life support system. And here's the real issue that ought to get the economists to sit up and take notice. Okay, if you're a farmer, you have to pay for your land, you pay taxes on the land, you have to buy the seed that you plant, or if you get animals, you have to buy those animals. You have an investment. In the ocean, the fish are free. They have a zero accounting base. All you have to do is go catch them. Anybody can do that, which is, of course, the appeal. You don't have to be a landowner. You don't have to pay, you just go get them. And that's for some people, especially coastal communities, island countries, it is truly a source of sustenance. It's not just a matter of livelihood, it's a matter of food. I think that is possible to achieve if it isn't overdone, but it cannot be achieved while at the same time we're out there with these monster ships taking thousands of tons of animals over the last 10 years. When you think it's beyond, you just can't imagine that the ocean can continue to yield year after year as much as we expect the ocean to continue doing. It is not sustainable. And it's also really important to face up. It is food security for coastal communities in some areas, for some island countries, food security. It is not food security for tuna to be shipped to Chicago and London and San Francisco, or to go to Antarctica to get krill to ship all over the world, or deep sea fish, or to mine the deep scattering layer, this important carbon layer in the ocean that now is being targeted for taking. Why? Because there's this illusion that it's being underutilized. We're utilizing it when we breathe. We're utilizing it when we exist. What part of it's keeping us alive don't we understand? To leave oil in the ground, gas in the ground, coal in the ground, fish in the sea, trees in the forest, keep them there. Don't let the carbon escape to the atmosphere to the extent that we can. We know we've got the recipe coming into focus for the land, but we have a long way to go before we respect the ocean for its most fundamental value to humans and to life on Earth, and that is we exist. Alani's back.
Can you hear me this time? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I switched computers and I hope that will make a difference. I'm sorry I missed all the great conversation, but I'm sure with this panel you skipped no beats without me.
No worries. We're glad to have you back. And I'd love to circle back to get your perspective on some things. So right before you dropped off, I was just going to ask you a little bit about, your work is very committed to protecting the ocean as well as protecting those who are or those who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods. And you've had a pretty ambitious approach in establishing these protected areas in the ocean. So I'd love to hear a bit about your vision for these large-scale MPAs and kind of highlight how your visions align with the Sustainable Development Goals, and kind of to give you some context as well about what we were just discussing. We were talking a bit about how to approach MPA opposition that is often met with, profit-minded individuals who are acting with acting more for the immediate financial returns. So in case you want to address
I mean, sure, that's a lot in there. I think, thank you so much. I think scale, is really important. And I don't think it's important what my particular vision is. I've been somebody working in this, but really what the world needs. And I think Sylvia really, captured that in her opening remarks. I didn't hear what Lance contributed, but I'm sure it's similar that, there's scientific consensus around what the world needs. People like Sylvia have known this for a long time, but it took the world a while to catch up to our early pioneers and visionaries. But the science is clear. The math is clear, right? These are not opinions about what's happening. And so if we need to get to 30%, it's really important that we think scale. And I want to make sure that when I say that, I'm not implying that bigger is better. I'll say that relative size and scale do really matter, though. And they matter because, you can't encompass adequate habitat trying to manage, be it fish, mammals, benthic resources, or people, quite frankly. And also, if you don't think scale, we're never going to reach those global targets. as you mentioned, the place that I managed and helped lead the protection of, Papahanaumokuakea, it's huge. And it's going to take a lot more of those, like 60 more Papahanaumokuakeas to reach 30%. I just want to let that sink in, right? That's a lot. That's a lot of ocean. Papahanaumokuakea is like 3.5 times the size of California. And so if you think about that, right, we have to think scale. We can't think small. We have to think about encompassing ecosystems. The calculations, it's math. And it's hard for people who are land-oriented to really understand just how big the ocean really is. Like the Pacific alone, you can put all land masses in the Pacific with plenty of room to swim around. So unless we think about that at that kind of scale, we're just never going to reach that target. And so, again, we're going to need all solutions. And I'm not here to judge that bigger is better or smaller don't matter. They all matter, right? They all matter. We all have to get them to be moving. And what also matters is people, right? While great ideas and data is super important, what changes the world are actions taken by people. And we can no longer talk about biodiversity alone. And thankfully, in my career in conservation, that's changed quite a bit, where we really understand that it's important that we think about what people need. Because let's face it, if we want ocean health, it's about making choices, pure and simple. When we choose more of one thing, we choose less of another thing. And so if we're going to choose more MPAs, we also have to be really clear that we're going to choose less of something else, probably less opportunity for taking out of the benthic habitat. It's going to be less opportunity for fishing, but it doesn't mean no fishing. It means creating more fish, both for the biodiversity benefit and for the benefit of humans. So I guess I resist the thinking that these are different, right? That we have to really split kind of whether we want to protect the ocean from whether we want to protect the economy, right? This inherent dichotomy, I still resist it. For industries highly dependent on protected natural capital, right? All the kind of jargony terms and ecosystems, the linkage between environmental and economic benefits are clear, particularly for industries that are highly dependent on that natural capital. Right? For example, if you just look at coral reefs, people love coral reefs. And you think about that in terms of reef adjacent tourism, an industry that generates maybe 35 billion annually, I think the latest study in 2017. So for companies operating in this segment, right, $36 billion segment, their employees, their key suppliers to all that tourism, and their shareholders, right, this linkage is direct. Then you take it, what is that benefit of marine protection? Or let's flip it on its head. The risk of ineffective protection extends beyond tourism, right? If you just keep with coral reefs, you think, okay, these are coastal assets. These are real estate assets. So they're asset owners. They're insurers of those assets, right? So they have a role, in coastal protection and also need to invest in that protection because coral reefs, if they're degraded, then all of a sudden all that great coastal real estate is at risk. So these industries, again, direct relationship to the destruction or not of coral reef assets. And let's just think, never mind the 300 million living in the 100-year coastal flood zones, which is getting bigger and bigger very quickly. And I know I'm getting a little bit on a little stump speech here, but so that's direct tourism. Then that's the direct real estate or indirect real estate and insurance industries. But then let's talk about how that influences the cost of financing, right? What it means is that also extends to direct relationship to governments and the financial sector. For any municipality, nation that have exposure to those risks, those coastal inundation risks, those insurance risks, ensuring more effective marine protection is important from a GDP standpoint, an employment standpoint, a social well-being standpoint, and how much it influences the cost of financing for government, right? Major rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, municipal and sovereign debt holders, they're integrating more and more. We see it, climate and other environmental, social, and governance risk factors into how they analyze, right? So failure of governments invest thoughtfully and strategically in the protection of the natural capital along our coastlines and in our oceans can simply result in higher borrowing costs. Right? I think that's pretty relevant, even more so, increasingly so, as national and subnational governments are today issuing huge amounts of new debt to finance COVID recovery. Right? And for countries that were already underwater, that's only adding to it. So when people say, hey, you have to choose between economics and nature, well, I mean, maybe. Yeah, you do, because when you do basically allow that nature to erode, you simultaneously are allowing our economy and our economic well-being to erode. And these are just like 3 examples. And I won't go any further. The list goes on and on. But more and more, you can't pick up an economic magazine or publication that doesn't talk about the need for new natural capital asset classes. Right. This is a real thing that we need to be thinking about strategically, and not just thinking about, but actually doing. Okay. I hope that covered all those questions. That was a lot in here, Jessie.
Thank you, Alani. I think it's important to, take the time to stress all these interconnections. But in the interest of time, and I'm sure you all have responses, but in the interest of time, I would love to introduce Leah Gerber, who is a professor of conservation science and the founding director of the Center for Biodiversity Outcomes at ASU. She's going to join us on screen quickly to ask a question to the panel. Go ahead, Leah.
Hi all, can you hear and see me?
I can hear you.
Let me just do a little adjusting here, see if I could get this.
Nope. She adjusted herself.
Give her a couple seconds. Maybe she can join. Maybe you can at the end and just keep moving on to. Oh, there she is.
Oh, can you hear and see me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be part of this. Thanks for the opportunity to join and as a discussant, very inspirational conversation and insights from everyone. My question is about the empirical support for how MPAs perform. I've been working over the last couple of years in the Galapagos Marine Reserve with the Galapagos National Park and the Lenfest Ocean Program to align data collection with achieving reserve objectives. And earlier, I think it was Lance who indicated that we have pretty good evidence that marine reserves work around the world. I think that there's a lot of potential for better linking the data collection to the management decisions in marine protected areas. Often we see the establishment of a reserve as the endpoint, when really that's just the beginning. So I'm curious to hear from the panel about knowledge gaps and attempts to integrate evidence on what works in marine protected areas from across the world, and furthermore to begin to build in concepts of ecosystem services and natural capital that Olani touched on. I think that in the same work that we're doing in Galapagos, we're trying to operationalize concepts of ecosystem services where we're building in the use of spatial areas throughout the reserve to try to balance competing objectives so that these really are a win-win triple bottom line solution. So very curious to hear insight from the panel on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Sylvia, please, if you have go ahead.
Could I jump in, or is there someone else? Okay. Yes, I'd like to look at the Galapagos and really celebrate the thinking that is underway right now. That when I first went to the Galapagos in 1966, the park was just beginning to come into its own. 97% of the land is protected. 3% allocated where people can do their thing. And of course, there's a lot of spillover in both directions. The iguanas walk down the street in the occupied part of the city, and people go, especially fishermen, go throughout the whole area. And that's kind of the point, that we, as terrestrial creatures, really embrace the land early on in conservation issues. We're still, like baby steps, trying to understand, how do you take care of the ocean? Why should we take care of the ocean? The ocean is so big, it takes care of itself, right? Well, now we are beginning to understand that what works on the land has a counterpart in the ocean, that taking wildlife on the land to the point of extinction, as we did with so many species and are still doing, the same can happen in the ocean, especially when you work at an industrial scale of wildlife capture and market. And when we couple that with other ways of damaging the ocean through what we're putting into the ocean, this avalanche of plastic and all the toxins, that used to think that the best place to get rid of something was throw it in the ocean, and we still think that way. And meanwhile, like changing the atmosphere and changing the ocean, changing the temperature, fossil fuels, we're changing the chemistry of the planet, including, of course, the ocean. So when we now have the unprecedented opportunity, armed with knowledge, to scale up, as Alani really urges us to do, we have to scale up in terms of respecting the natural systems, air, water on the land, the ocean, the diversity of life, and to think this is our space, and it's failing. We have to take measures that even 10 years ago might seem a little too bold to be realistic. We know what to do. We have to stop this industrial extraction of wildlife. We have to think of creatures in the sea as wildlife. In the Galapagos, we don't eat the iguanas or the flightless cormorants, but it's okay to consume an endemic grouper or an endemic whatever, the little slipper lobster that is endemic to the Galapagos. We have to think about the connections, the little fish that is so important as food for the boobies, food for the sea lions, food for the flightless cormorants, little solima that occur in magnificent schools, a little bit like herring. And yet it's okay to take them for bait, even though it's an endemic species, even though it's connected to the creatures we protect on the land. We didn't know this when we first began thinking about how do you protect the Galapagos. But now we know. Now we have a chance to get it right, to scale up. And it's really encouraging to see the president, the officials, certainly the people in the Galapagos, understanding that the more you take care of and protect, the greater the benefits back to you. Whether you make your living as a fisherman, what's happening now, and when I first went to the Galapagos, and when I was there just in the past year, the sharks, where are they? They're gone. I mean, there are some, but we know how to kill them. We've got to do a better job of taking care of them. And the grouper, my goodness. Yes, they taste good. That's their problem. But they're also critical to the health of the ecosystem. And they have a carbon unit, carbon-based, like whales. And so extrapolating what's happening in the Galapagos and in Papua New Guinea to the whole world and say we have to think differently. Fish are not free. A dead fish should not be worth more than a live fish, but they are, the way we account for nature now. Zero accounting base for a live fish. Dead fish, we can put a dollar sign on it. We can market it. Marketing wildlife for cash. Not always for food, but as money. You have to really think in a new way about ocean life and connect it back to our life.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Can I make a quick comment? I mentioned the Marine, it would be very short, the Marine Protection Atlas. And in doing that work, we recognized we focused a lot on how marine protected areas were not doing the job. And as a result of that, took a look through the Blue Parks Initiative at where marine parks were doing a good job. And the Blue Parks became that criteria, very similar to what Leah had identified in terms of it being more than just what's going on fishing. Are you actually monitoring and managing and, you know, working with the community and doing these activities that really lead to effective long-term conservation? So in Galapagos as well as Papahanaumokuakea are both blue parks. They're 2 of 16 around the world because they recognize that it's a little bit more than just you know, having a regulation on a book. It's really putting it all into action. And I think what's really important from there is that these parks don't exist in a vacuum, right? The 30% we're hoping for doesn't exist in 100% of ocean that's, you know, free fire zone, right? We have to still sustainably manage and really put a lot more effort into the whole ocean ecosystem, as Sylvia's pointing out, even while we have these, you know, really strongly protected areas that are kind of the seed corn, right, for the rest of the ocean.
Thank you, Lance. Yeah, in the interest of time, sorry, Alani. In the interest of time, I'd like to kind of move on to our next portion. We have Mark Kaplan, who is going to be joining us and sharing a bit about how he's reimagined a traceable and ethical seafood supply chain. So, Mark, please request to join us on screen, and maybe we can revisit some of those points at the end. But welcome, Mark.
Hello, everyone.
I'll give an introduction. Mark is a recognized leader in the mobile marketing, sustainability, and telecommunications industries, and having built influential partnerships and implemented mobile marketing platforms in more than 30 countries. He's currently a partner at Invisible, which is a technology-focused food company, and prior to joining Invisible, he served as the Global Vice President of Sustainable Solutions at Unilever, where he led initiatives in supporting their sustainable living plan. And prior to this, he was involved with the Mfish initiative, which is a public-private partnership that aimed to make fishing more sustainable. So Mark is going to share a little bit about his journey from this venture to where he is at today at Invisible. So please take us away, Mark.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm assuming everyone can hear me well? Great. Hi, everybody. So it has been quite a journey, starting from the Mfish experience when I first met some of you. You know, when we set up Invisible, the goal was to really take Unilever's approach to sustainable business and apply it to seafood, because there was really nothing like it. And we felt that a good way to achieve a goal was to establish fully traceable, sustainable seafood supply chains so that we could address some of the issues that were mentioned here. And I thought a good way to do it, rather than boring everybody with slides and self-promotion, was to really address how we could help some of the issues that everybody spoke about before I came on. And then hopefully I can close with a challenge for everyone to potentially leverage some of the work that we're doing, and we'll open up our seafood supply chains to hopefully to do them in a better way with guidance from folks like everyone on this group. So first and foremost, Invisible is a fully traceable, sustainable seafood company. we had to build our own traceability system because we were looking at two alternatives. One was either a enterprise, expensive big tech that would break the financial models and continue giving excuses to not execute fully traceable supply chains, or unreliable cryptocurrency businesses, really. And so what we did is we took the learning that we had from MFish, we applied the practices of capacity building and built our supply chain starting with the source, and then went further upstream to complete the supply chain really from the bottom up rather than the top down. I know bottom up is not the right way to say it, but a lot of people get it when I say it that way. And so now to really address why we do this and the opportunity. So first and foremost, addressing the goal of having no industrial fishing in high seas or exclusive economic zones. Traceability, we feel, is a way to help monitor and measure the offtake from source. So the steps that we've taken to help us do this better is that we've done an approach for event-based traceability. So we're able, with digital identity, so we can do everything from connect the fishery license to the lot number of the product that's being off-taken. So we can make sure that we're monitoring the amount of seafood taken to the FAO zone, so we can at least have visibility into the volumes that are being taken. What we've done is made a commitment to not source from, or I should say deprioritize, all industrial suppliers and only working with those who are small scale and independent, ideally those that are fair trade certified, as it's the largest certification across our product line. In terms of just doing it, we took the original experience I had, and my background is in technology. When I first met some of the folks here at the MFish initiative, we tried approaching the issue of sustainable fisheries from a technology approach, but we faced resistance from seafood companies that would refuse traceability, both from the buyer side and the supply side. So we had to do it ourselves. And so we then, now fast forward, in 2 years, we made that commitment and we've achieved fully traceable supply chains across farmed, wild, developing markets, domestic market, local distribution, export distribution, so on and so forth. And actually, in terms of the hope spots, what's interesting is a few of our sites overlap with regions that are close to hope spots. And we would love to open those up to bring together the idea of responsible fishing, actually locally, a local approach to sustainably sourced seafood that actually overlaps with tourism quite a bit, and open up that information and those supply chains to a collaborative approach, knowing that we need the expertise of folks like Lance, Alani, and Sylvia in order for us to really do this in a truly responsible way. And then as far as MPAs are concerned, looking at a community engagement approach to local sourcing, we feel like helps us actually engage the local community in developing that source for themselves, rather than treating it as an extractive business case. And so that I think is something that we have a real opportunity to build on. And there's an initiative that started coming out of the Reboot the Ocean initiative with the UN Global Compact in Costa Rica that I think we could leverage. Then now going further into engagement around this, one thing that we like to do, and I know this sounds like semantics, but there's more to it than that, we would like to work with everyone here to really change the conversation around sustainability to a regenerative approach to seafood. I know that the land-based food industry is doing a very good job around changing that conversation. And what we see is there's an opportunity to really bridge the gap between a few different UN initiatives to help achieve this. And I'll wrap up my little piece here with what we recognized here in terms of, and now I'm going back to the statement that was made in treating fish as more than food. One thing that we and one last point here is focusing on the people in the supply chain, as I think Alani brought up earlier, which is in the UN Global Compact, we made a proposition to bring together the SDG 5, SDG 8, and the SDG 14 action platforms to create really a virtual lab, for lack of a better term, where we could take some of these multi-stakeholder initiatives and execute them and operationalize them in the real world with a foundation for scale. We really think that bringing together the agrobiodiversity initiatives that are out there, the work on livelihoods for small-scale producers, and then fully traceable, sustainable seafood as really complementary initiatives in the UN Global Compact, and bringing them together around a regenerative approach, generally speaking, to food really led by seafood. Thank you. Sorry if I was all over the place a little bit. I'm trying to cover everything.
I know, thank you. A lot to cover in a short amount of time. And it's great to hear about these emerging technologies and how they can be used to transform new sustainable industries.
One last point that I'd like to bring up. We actually did the one bit of self-promotion that I will state here is we did overcome the barrier to have a national large market grocery chain or network adopt and commit to fully traceable seafood. So now we have market support to enforce and incentivize more sustainable behavior in local communities.
Thank you. Really quickly, we have one question. We're about out of time, but maybe a quick clarifying question to answer for you, Mark, is from Amanda. She's asking if transparency is referring to consumers making their own choice, knowing if they're helping or hurting the planet.
Absolutely. One of the benefits for the consumer-facing side is the ability to educate and have the market enforce these issues. We did commit to full transparency in addition to traceability, so that's a requirement for participation. So both from a price standpoint, we committed to price transparency to break the lack of equitable compensation downstream in supply chains. And then going forward, we created data templates to better capture sustainable practices in supply chains. So then we could educate the market, mainly consumers, on more about what it means to have sustainable seafood, to educate them on the cultures in the local communities, what fish means to the local communities, and really helping balance some of the thinking that because a consumer is buying a piece of fish that's a portion, that it doesn't come from a live animal, and then the communities that it comes from. Because when people look at a logo, they think about a brand and they don't think about the people making the decisions behind those brands. And what we're hoping to do is use traceability to help bridge some of those gaps.
Thank you, Mark. We have about 1 minute left. Sorry for the time crunch. Sylvia, I would love to allow you to have the final word. Please go ahead.
Okay, very quickly. I would love to change the word seafood to sea life. You have sea life. We're talking about wildlife. You could even say sea wildlife, and understand what we're eating. and to realize that for most people of the 8 billion or so of us, it's a luxury. It's not a necessity. It's a choice. It's a choice. So we talk about sustainable lifestyle, so you can have tuna anywhere in the world. But if everybody got their own tuna, there wouldn't be enough tuna to go around for the 8 billion people who now exist. So I think we need to be really careful about encouraging, amping up how much sea life we consume. The ocean needs fish more than we need fish in most places.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for local communities. It's different for people who have few choices. For most of us, we have the ability, we have the knowledge, we have the superpower of knowing. We have to think about the whole planet and how the ocean relates, how wildlife in the ocean relates to climate. And instead of just thinking about having something that we gained a habit of eating, when you think nobody ate orange roughy before the middle of the 20th century, and now it's, or krill was not accessible until recent years. We have to, traceability is important, but to respect how much we're taking and how much we need to protect if we're going to take any. The percentage in the Galapagos for the land is a pretty good model to look at. 97% protected, you can sort of use 3% and not lose the 97%. But when you use 97%, which is about what we're doing for the ocean, and only protect 3%, you'll see what we're now seeing, a decline across the board. We need to think, as Alani says, we need to scale up how much we leave as our life support system, period. We need to look at the processes that govern the way the world works. And that means these small, medium, and large pieces that we call seafood, sea life in the ocean, for more than just something to adorn our plates.
Totally agree.
Yes.
As much as I'm here, hoping to work with all of you guys to achieve that.
All right, I'm in.
All right.
Thank you all. Yes, Mark completely agrees. And I would love for you all to continue these conversations offline. We unfortunately are out of time. So I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to everyone for the audience. And I encourage you all to kind of consider how you can create hope spots in your own life. So thank you for joining. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Bye, everybody.